Hi everybody, and welcome to this video of the series Simplified Openings. In this video, I would like to show you one idea which I first saw played by Magnus Carlsen, which honestly at first sight looked like a very silly one. And when I saw it first, I thought it was just a quirk, yeah, on part of the then world champion, and I didn't pay much attention to it. But lately I kind of revisited it, and well, it turned out that Magnus, well, had an interesting idea in mind, and I thought that it's perhaps a good idea to show this one to you and perhaps give you some sparks in your Caro-Kann if you play the Caro-Kann with the black pieces. So after e4, c6, d4, d5, we will be taking a look at the, I think, most critical and most popular recently variation uh, against the Caro-Kann, which is the advanced variation. This is the critical test for the Caro-Kann. In the past, I don't know how many years already, everybody's playing it. And I think it's good to have, apart from, let's say, your usual repertoire, some surprising ideas to keep your opponents on their toes. So bishop f5, the natural Caro-Kann type of move, even though the move c5 has become quite popular recently, but I never kind of uh, liked it so much when looking at this from black's perspective. I've always looked at bishop f5, that should be the critical move. So now knight f3, e6, and the move bishop e2, the so-called short variation. Not short because it's short, but because it was invented by Nigel Short in the early 90s. So white simply develops normally, bishop e2 short castle, and then tries to use the space advantage, yeah, and the somewhat exposed position of this bishop on f5 to get a good play. And this is the position where Carlsen's idea uh, comes to the fore. There are many theoretical moves. There is c5, there is knight d7, there is knight d7, there is h6. Yeah, these are the main ones. And they all have their own theory, and I'm pretty sure as a Caro-Kann players, you have your own alliance here. But the Carlsen idea starts with the, at first sight, really, how should I put it, amateurish, yeah? Check of bishop b4. You know, Patzer sees check, Patzer gives check. Bishop b4 check, yeah? Looks completely out of, like, what the hell is this? Yeah, and after c3, bishop a5. So, after getting over the initial shock, let's have a more sensible look at the position and try to understand what the idea of this bishop maneuver is. There are two ideas, in fact. One is that after knight e7, the bishop is no longer stuck on f8 and black can castle. Okay, so speeding up black's development. And the second idea is that the bishop can drop back to b6 or c7, depending on circumstances, and aid the undermining of the white center. So from b6 after c5, there will be attack on the d4 pawn, and from c7 after f6, there will be attack on white's e5 pawn. And this is the idea of the bishop before bishop a5 maneuver. So what can white do here? I think, especially from a surprised partner, you can expect that they will just castle it very quickly, maybe even now, and then try to go for this maneuver knight bd2, knight f1, knight g3, going after this bishop on f5. I think that's by far the most natural plan for white in this position, and in fact it is the most commonly played plan. Mind you, this variation is not very commonly played, so it's still kind of rare, even though it has been played a couple of times by Magnus Carlsen. There are some alternatives, yeah, and one of them is the move like queen b3, which looks like a strange move, and whose idea is that after bishop b6, which is natural, a4, a5, knight h4, knight e7, the engine claims that white has some sort of an advantage, but and instead the engine suggests a pawn sacrifice with knight d7. And I think this is quite an interesting line to note. Queen takes b7, knight e7, so speeding up development, and black's side, so defending the pawn on c6. And black's idea is that he's quite quick with playing the center. So knight bd2, let's say, castles. Queen must drop back at some point not to be trapped. And now knight g6 and f6 quickly. And there is a lot of pressure on the e5 pawn, and if the f file is opened, all these black pieces can create activity on the king side. Knight may come to f4, yeah, the bishop can go back to c7, yeah, and the compensation is quite good. But I don't expect to see queen b3 a lot here. White can try the maneuver before castling, hoping to to save a tempo on the move rook e1. Yeah? So let's see how this one works. Let's say knight bd2, knight d7. Black basically plays along the same lines. Knight f1, knight e7, knight g3. And now there is a choice. There is bishop g4 and there is bishop g6. Yeah, so let's check bishop g4, castle, c5. Just following the plan. Yeah, develop and undermine the center with c5. dc5, now take on f3, bishop f3, bishop c7. Black will regain the pawn either on c5 or on e5 and have this standard rock solid Caro-Kann positioning, having given up the bishop pair but obtaining a rock solid position. Position objectively is equal. And there is also bishop g6 here. If white goes after the bishop still with knight h4, still c5, yeah, dc5, bishop c7, the same idea, yeah. One of the pawns will fall and black is fine. So that's why normally white castles and now knight d7. And in this position, I think is the moment where black should actually pay attention. As the plan is knight bd2 and then rook e1, knight f1 and knight g3, it's very important in fact how white starts to implement this plan. Does he start with rook e1 or does he start with knight bd2? Before I explain the difference, let me show you the game by Magnus Carlsen. This time, in this one, he won pretty quickly against the unfortunate Anish Giri. Anish tried to be smart and play the move like a4, trying to expand on the queen side. It didn't work so well. Bishop c7 by Carlsen, avoiding some b4 with tempo. Knight bd2 and f6. Yeah, this is, we see the idea. Yeah, the bishop on c7 is quite good attacking this pawn on e5. Rook e1. White is sacrificing a pawn in order to start play on the e file, but Carlsen postpones the capture and goes knight h6 and wants to castle. So knight f1, f takes e5, d takes e5, and now castle. And this is already a very good position for black. The point is that after bishop h6, g takes h6, he has really excellent light square control, as is typical of the Caro-Kann, but also play against this pawn on e5, thanks to that bishop on c7. The king is safe. King h8 can happen at any point. The rook is here, the queen is here. Nothing bad had happened. Black is fine, and Giri committed a mistake already by playing queen d4, trying to latch onto this pawn on e5. But after bishop e4, very strong move by Carlsen, white is in trouble. Why? Because there is there is bishop f3, queen g5, and it's likely that that pawn will fall. But there is also play on the f file, and Carlsen won, in fact, like 9 moves from here. So this was played in 2016. You can look up the game, but very convincing victory for black. So a4, like I said, I don't expect to see it much. Now let's go back to the crucial differences. If white starts with knight bd2, yeah, this means that keeping the rook on f1 gives white one additional option. And if we continue along the lines as against rook e1 and we go knight e7, yeah, the knight on e7 blocks the queen's control over the h4 square, and after knight h4, castles g4, bishop g6, f4, the rook's position on f1 comes in so handy to support the f5 push. And here white is already winning. I think Engine gives something like +2 for white. Yeah. So pay special attention. If white keeps the rook on f1 after knight bd2, then we should make sure that we create some space for our bishop and we go h6. Yeah, useful move, but at the same time not blocking the queen's control over the h4 square. And now after rook e1, knight e7, we have a transposition to the lines after that we will look at after rook e1. Okay, knight f1, short castle, and we will take a look at this position via the move order with rook e1. So this is the key thing you must remember when it comes to the move orders. If the rook stays on f1, don't allow knight h4, play h6 first, yeah, wait for rook e1 and then knight e7. Okay, so let's take a look at rook e1. Now, in order to be consistent with the repertoire, yeah, We will look at the positions with h6 here, knight bd2, knight e7, which I mentioned. But the move rook e1 allows us an extra option, which is avoiding the move h6 and going knight e7 immediately. Why? Well, we know, because now knight h4 is possible, but without the rook on f1, f4, f5 doesn't have the same strength. Yeah, so let's say knight h4, short castle, takes on f5, takes on f5, bishop d3, c5, and black is fine. Yeah. And after knight bd2, castles, knight h4, f6, undermining the center. Yeah. And this leads to some sharp play. Yeah. For example, g4. Otherwise, let's say ef6 or g4. Okay, let's check all of them. Yeah. Knight f5, knight f5, ef6, queen f6 is already quite comfortable for black. Bishop drops to c7. Very good control over the center. e5 can come at any point. Or similarly, let's say ef6, knight f6 here. Again, very good position for black. Whereas g4, bishop g6, ef6, knight f6, g5, knight e8. Again, is a very sharp position. White has weakened the king side, and this gives black some long-term prospects. Yeah, playing against that king. If bishop g4, bishop f5 here. Yeah, so pretty sharp position. So this is the additional option that we have after rook e1. Yeah, if you don't want to be bothered, okay, but the extra option, you can just go h6. Yeah, and then you have knight bd2, knight e7, exactly the same position as after knight bd2. Knight f1 now, and short castle. There are moves like bishop h7 and bishop c7. I checked them both, but they don't seem sufficient. And I think short castle is actually the most precise move here. After knight g3, bishop draws back to h7. And now we have more or less reached the starting position of the middle game. Both sides have completed their development. White accomplished the plan of putting a knight on g3. Yeah, and here we have let's say a standard Caro-Kann battle. Objectively speaking, black is fine. So main move here for white is the move knight h5. Yeah, but there is also b4. Yeah, hitting the bishop and stopping c5, yeah, by controlling that square. So bishop c7 now, no point in putting on b6 since c5 won't happen. Bishop c7 with the idea of f6, yeah. And if something like, say, bishop d3, queen d3, yeah. And now black has a choice. He can sacrifice a pawn directly with f6, ef6, knight f6, rook takes e6, bishop takes g3, eliminating the knight that controls the e4 square, h takes g3 and knight e4 with good compensation. Yeah, strong knight, control of the light squares. But it's also possible to play in a more patient way, queen e8. Yeah? And the idea of queen e8 is to go f6 still, but after e6 to take with the rook, to defend the pawn on e6, and the queen on e8 is necessary to stop knight h5 harassing that rook on f6. Yeah? So it's a satisfactory position for black. Knight h5 is critical. Now the idea of after f6, knight f4, there are problems with this pawn a little bit, yeah, on e6. So c5, f6 doesn't work, well, c5 should work. And here, according to the engine, the best move is the move bishop b5. Yeah. In case of dc5, bishop g6, knight f4, bishop c7, we may have something similar. Yeah, after knight g6, fg6 is the correct recapture, as we will see. Even though in this position, maybe even knight g6 should work because of that attack on the pawn on e5. But after bishop b5, bishop g6, getting rid of that knight, knight f4, bishop b6. The idea is to put pressure on d4, knight g6 and fg6. This is the key recapture for black in this variation. Yeah, it opens the f file. Yeah, strengthens the control over the f5 square, so knight f5. Yeah, and this pawn can be used to gain space on the king side by something like g5. Let's say bishop e3, cd, and now knight b8. Yeah. And if you put this position to the engine will like white tremendously. Yeah? But if you let it for a very long time, let it go to a very huge, big depth, the evaluation will start to drop. And this is not surprising because black's position is first extremely solid, and he has a very nice setup for all his pieces. So the knight will come to c6, so both knight and the bishop will attack d4. The other knight will come to f5, third attack on d4, and possibly threatening to rid white of the advantage of the bishop pair. The pawn will come to g5 to control some dark squares on the kingside. And then the nice maneuver, rook c8, rook c7, rook cf7, doubling on the f file. So very cozy, very nice plan for black. Setup, very nice setup of the pieces, and extremely solid position. So how is white going to break through? Yeah, and if you let it, like I said, if you let the engine run for a longer period, it will start, the evaluation will start to drop, and then you realize that this is an acceptable position for black. So yeah, that's the sparky, exciting, adventurous line in the advanced Caro-Kann for black. I hope you like the idea. I think it's an interesting one, worth at least having on one's repertoire as a surprise weapon. Of course, you should explore it more deeply. I've given you the overview and like some analysis, some ideas, some important aspects about move orders. But generally speaking, this should be enough for you to already start using it in your games. So if you're a Caro-Kann player, I hope you appreciate this analysis. So guys, thanks for watching. Cowboy Hikaru says smash that subscribe button. Yeah, tell me what you think about this line in the comments. Keep on watching, keep on subscribing, comment on things, and I'll see you again soon next week. Take care.